Okay, with Olivia Andrus-Drennan, the Dolphin Dilemma is the short film played at the Wild Sun Festival. What is the Dolphin Dilemma? Not to it's a dilemma for sure. I don't mean to be smart about it because I know it's a serious issue. I'm just curious explain with people what the Dolphin Dilemma is.
Yeah, so currently we are in this climate crisis. Lots of fresh water has been dumping into our ocean system via the glacier melt, and a lot more rain systems have coming in, and that's been affecting dolphins and cetaceans all around the world. So what happens is the fresh water mixes with salt water, which most dolphins are going to be more oceanic species.
Mhm.
So they are used to having their body just full around salt water, and their skin doesn't have any protection. It doesn't have like hairs or anything to kind of wick away any of the water. And if you think about fresh water and salt water mixing, everybody thinks, well, it shouldn't be a problem. It should just mix really quickly. But that doesn't actually happen. It takes a long time, especially if there's not a lot of wind or a lot of movement. And so what happens is you get this layer of fresh water, or in the case of the Burrunan dolphins that is within this film, the whole system of 70 miles of water became salt water or brackish water, a mixture of fresh and salt, to completely fresh water. And the dolphins had nowhere to go. So what happens is this disease becomes prevalent on dolphin skin, and it causes lesions, which is like third-degree burns in a human who might be in a fire, and they have nowhere to go. They have to breathe. They have to be within the water itself. And so the only reason why this is happening is because of climate change, and that's kind of what the problem is that we didn't even know that water could cause burns on these animals. And so that's what's happening with whales and dolphins around the world now, because fresh water is getting into our ocean system and their skin isn't adapted to it.
No wonder you're a documentarian. I was such a great uh you just explained everything in a nutshell. It was so good, amazing.
Yeah,
I've
thank you.
I've been fortunate enough, not or unfortunate enough, to basically watch a lot of environmental films because of what I do, and there seems to be a fish like a fish problem around all the oceans. Like a lot of fish are traveling into different areas. I just interviewed somebody that there's like crabs now in the Italy off of Mediterranean Sea that came from came from to the United States, came from um, from New England area, and now it's navigated over there. So there's all these problems with the oceans where these fish and
Yeah.
they're having troubles because they're
Yeah,
almost like they have to readjust and re-evolve, dare I say, there to the new surroundings.
it's a very complicated problem, right? You can't just fix one thing. We can't focus on one problem. But the thing that I think with our film, and especially with climate change in general, when we're talking about change, because it's a huge topic, you can go on many different ways. It's a problem that isn't going to be solved with inaction, but people are so overwhelmed with the problem being so overwhelming that it causes inaction. So what we have found is that if we focus on the local problems,
Yeah.
those local dolphins within the Burnans or your local species that are around. There are people on the ground doing this work right now. They are in the research. They are figuring out ways to counteract the problems of climate change. And so we have found, if you focus on that, if every single person got involved with their local environmental group and work towards their own local issues, it actually would fix the problem globally, because you're focusing on the smaller point, but there's a lot of us. And if we all work together to do that, makes it a lot easier.
So how did you get, because you're from the United States and this
Yeah.
is a Australian kind of region story. So how did you get involved in making this documentary? How,
So I was getting my grad degree in science and natural history filmmaking with Montana State University. And it was COVID and no one was making films. So I reached out to the Marine Mammal Center, which is based in Sausalito, California, and they had an internship happening. And so I was working with them as an intern, and they published the freshwater skin disease paper while I was working there. And I said, this would be amazing to do for my thesis film if I have the opportunity. So they accepted. I was able to film Dr. Duignan, who is based in the US, but at the time of the study, he was in Australia helping diagnose the dolphins. And then I waited for about 6 months and the world kind of opened up. And so I contacted the Marine Mammal Foundation in Australia and asked them if they were even doing studying, because again, COVID, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And so she said, yeah, Dr. Kate Robb said, we're actually going on the boat in a few months, and we'd be happy to have you. So I fundraised it for about $5,000 and then shipped my little butt up to Australia. And there you go. That's kind of how that happened.
And you just finished the film, like post-production, everything, like a few months ago, I guess, right?
Yeah, so we did the first like draft of the film for my thesis to get my thesis, but then I went back, I worked on the animation, I got a new composer, and then I worked on the audio, just fixes and cleans to make it a little more solidified as a film.
Because I'm reading your credits, and it seems like there's a lot of you in the credits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
You
or
shot the film as well. I know you had Samuel who helped you, but you shot majority of the film yourself, right?
yeah, so in our degree, we're kind of taught to be a one-man band. And it really helped in this case because what they do when they're on the boat, you saw in the film, it's very tiny. So there's not a lot of people that can get on that ship. There literally are only 4 people on their
Yeah.
ship that can go. So we knew we had to be small. And I produced, I directed, I wrote and edited and shot all of this documentary. Sam did most of the dive. There's a few shots with dive work, and he was certified at the time and wanted to just go do diving. So I said, hey, you want to help on my doc? You can dive with dolphins. And he said, yeah, let's do it.
You couldn't do that also? You couldn't get a certificate and you couldn't dive with the dolphins? You couldn't
Not in time.
I'm kidding. I'm joking around. Like you did everything else except for
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, basically with those dolphin shots, because of their permit and where they're placed, they're able to get right next to the boat. And so a lot of the time, all we had to do was stick a GoPro in the water
Yeah.
and the dolphins would be right there. So that was pretty incredible.
I have to ask a segue question.
Yeah.
How do we know how smart dolphins are?
Well, they're thought to be the second smartest being mammal in the world.
So we're supposed to be number one?
You are supposed to be number one.
I don't really believe
supposed
that's
to be
true.
number.
I just think that
Yeah.
we're able to function around the world. I don't think we're the smart. I think birds are smarter than us, but go ahead. Go ahead.
Wait, yeah, according to, I would say most biologists, they would accredit dolphins to being
But
the
humans are
second.
the ones who are basically coming up with that diagnosis, right? So it's a
Yeah,
little biased.
yeah,
It's a biased survey. Go ahead, but go ahead.
yeah. Well, I know dolphins for sure are definitely well loved. I mean, that's been the biggest response I think we've seen within the film is
Yeah.
just the care that they bring. And it's one of the top industries on the ocean is whale watching and dolphin swimming and all of the watching aspects.
But
So
they know how to communicate with each other, right? Is that
yeah,
yeah.
yep, they do. They communicate usually through clicks and body motions and movements. within themselves. They can be trained. I mean, there was in the US history, there was a squad of dolphins that was trained to find potential missiles from U-boats. So they're very intelligent creatures. They know how to take out, whole swarms of fish. They play. These are all things that, they're emotionally intelligent as well. I mean, Kate kind of says it best. She looks in the water and she thinks like, they're looking right back at her and directly, and we kind of
I think they
experience.
are. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You nailed it. There's a strong emotional intelligence that they
yeah,
have, right? So, and we don't even know the senses. That's the thing about humans. We can only sometimes we have to think fourth dimensionally, right? Because they have different senses than we do, right? So who
yeah.
knows what's happening, right? Like we don't know, right?
Yeah, we can only talk, and this is
Speculate.
kind of interesting with doing wildlife documentary in general, is that we can only talk with what we know. So we see something and we equate it to something that we know, and we're putting it on whatever that animal is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And now I find it fascinating, like, and that we as a people, but it also helps us to understand our world, right? We describe things in metaphors because it's easier for something to understand, instead of freshwater skin disease, saying burns. That's an easy equation to make, because it gives that visual reference. So I think a lot of the time when we are putting anthropomorphizing an animal is for our own understanding.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's talk about the film itself. So basically it's 18 minutes long. You went down there, you said you seems like you had some re-edits, you kind of like finessed things. But when you were shooting, did you have a story in place? Did you know what you wanted to do? Like, I'm curious about your kind of storytelling process.
Yeah, so I read their paper multiple times, and I knew that I really wanted to focus on explaining the science well. That's just been it's a complicated story. There are many factors to it, and they did a lot of testing to figure it out. And so I really focused on, okay, when I was with them, how can we explain this really complicated issue in the most concise way? And I found that animation was definitely helpful. I found that trying to take the beauty aspect of why we love dolphins is the other way that I went, with the emotional connection, because it is so strong with people. So that was where my brain was when I was interviewing them and being on the ship. I also wanted the audience to feel like they were there and they were doing the research with them. And so that's why I found it really important to get on the ship with Kate and her team, to show like you are doing the science with these scientists who are out there every single moment they can spare to study these animals. So those were my thought processes when I made this.
So you kind of had thematics, you kind of had like bullet point thematics, and then
Yeah.
you're gonna try to find a story within those elements, I guess.
Yeah, I find with documentary that's usually how it ends up. You have the idea in your brain, but until you actually shoot it and you see what you've shot,
Yeah,
um, that's really when the storytelling begins, is in the edit. Because we had 3 hours with Dr. Duignan, we had 3 hours with Dr. Kate, we had
yeah.
everything we could possibly want. It could have gone so many different ways, but it's really within that edit and seeing what you have and all the images that come together and the story. I tend to focus on words first and the placement of those, when I'm interviewing someone. And then all of that beautiful imagery comes afterwards until we have that story set.
But that said, this is a short film, so did you always have that under 20 minutes in your mind when you're making the film?
No, because we had so much content, I was really thinking it could be longer,
Yeah.
but the more times that you go through it and the more times that you edit everything down, I just didn't think it needed to be longer. It could be a feature length film if you continued on and went and looked at the glaciers themselves or interviewed more people, but the story itself is pretty direct and concise and fast for a reason. It's because it's an issue that is also fast, and so I just felt like it was the perfect time frame.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, of course, you need more money and
Yeah.
because the bigger story is that you can go to different areas where dolphins are. There's like who's figuring out who's coming to a conclusion of the conflict, I guess, right? Like
Yeah.
kind of have a
I
happy
mean,
ending in a sense.
yeah, well, I don't know. I find it hopeful just because there are people out there that are working on the problem. It isn't just, and it could
Yeah.
be, yeah. So it definitely could be a longer film. You could go and look at glaciers and talk about glacial melt and how that's affecting freshwater skin disease. You could slow down the animations and get more involved with the scientists themselves. There's many ways to do it, but for me it just felt right.
So I found this interesting. This is kind of crazy for me, but yeah, at the end of the movie, it said that it's produced in collaboration with Montana State University, the Marine Mammal Center, Marine Mammal Foundation, and the Murdoch University.
Mhm.
That's a lot of M's. Like, is there a coincidence here of like all the M's?
Yeah, I'm just collecting a lot of M's.
Yeah.
No, no, it just kind of happened that way. I mean, I was going to Montana State. Murdoch was the second place, and then they marine mammals. I mean, that's what their focus is on. So,
No, no. I just find I know that that's just me being a nerd. It's
yeah,
like oh my god, like what are the odds of like 26 letters in the alphabet that all four of them are all M's? So
yeah.
it's
It
like one
was
in 10,000.
Yeah, very, very different. The only one that's
Yeah,
different is my production company, which is Big Sky. But
yeah.
yeah, they they definitely I didn't plan that, which is fun.
Okay, so you're okay. So like you said, but to go back to your questions,
Yeah.
that's that's like you could talk about like because you talk about feature films because your questions kind of lead to a bigger project, I guess, right? But I by the way, I think it's perfect. It's a perfect 18-minute film. I think you did the right choice. But why do you think? Because the one question you brought out is like why do you think that humans like dolphins so much? There's a cuteness factor, of course, because we all like cuteness, right? We're all vanity obsessed as a species, but is it
Yeah.
just the cuteness of the animal or
I think it could be a lot of things. I mean, for me personally, dolphins are my one of my favorite animals, and it always had to do with speed. They're one of the fastest animals in the water, and my lack of running always wanted me to be inspired by seeing them in the water
yeah.
and moving. The fact that they're so beautiful, they're curious, they come up to boats, they aren't shy about getting in the water with people. There are stories about them saving human lives when people have gotten stranded in the ocean. I mean, I just think they're one of the species that people are just obsessed with. And whether that is because we see them, where we are trained, whether like with Flipper, that was a huge show
Yeah, it's
that
I was gonna
happened.
say there's the kid influence, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of books about it and
Yep.
TV shows.
So
There's like
you're
a yeah.
just you see it all the time. And so why wouldn't you fall in love with them? And I do think, I mean, at least for me, when I was with them, and I feel this with usually ocean species in general, but dolphins especially, when I'm next to them in the water, it's just magic. Like I can't describe it. It's just something like another being is recognizing me, and you can see it
Yeah.
in their eyes, and they're choosing to be around
They like
us.
humans.
Yeah.
They like
They're
compared to
curious.
most animals, they don't.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in Niagara Falls, so they had like God, I hope they don't do this anymore, but they had Marine Land, kind of like a SeaWorld kind of thing, right? where they, and then that's what used to go to the shows, and they had the killer whales. What do they call them now? The orcas.
Orcas.
Yeah,
Yep.
they don't call them the killer whales anymore. That wouldn't be PC.
Yeah.
But then the dolphin, they would have dolphins in the orcas, and then of course when you're a kid, you're attracted to that because they
Yeah.
see that these people are like jumping on top of the or swimming with the dolphin, and it's the human effect, I guess, right? They're saying like, because you can't do that with a tiger or a lion, right? So
Yeah, I would hope not. I'm sure
well, you
there are
can,
people
but
out
you're
there.
gonna get killed, right? So
Yeah, I yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I do think that is definitely true, especially like if you think about zoos. We as my undergrad degree is in wildlife biology as well.
okay,
So I grew up thinking I was going to be a zoologist and being a zookeeper and falling in love as a kid being at zoos. But now that I understand like animal behavior and everything around it, going to zoos are a little bit difficult. But I understand that they're an amazing education opportunity.
sure, yeah.
And they do a lot for conservation. So there's like this
It's
double-edged
not a
sword.
black and white conflict,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
right.
I,
So
I I call it, I don't know if you agree with this, but I call it the socialism of for the animals, meaning that they're gonna live longer, but they're not doing much, right? They're just
right,
basically like they're not in conflict. So they're just
right,
chilling out, right? Like, but it's like,
right.
yeah, they'd be like a night, like so they don't have to work, right? But then if they're in the
Right.
wildlife, they have to work, right? So
Right. They're there to survive. So it's like you have that entertainment factor and then you have that conservation factor. And so it's a complicated issue. And but as a kid, you don't know any of that. And you're just
yeah,
seeing this amazing animal right next to you for the first time. And it gets you interested in potentially studying things further on. So I do think like that's a huge factor in our obsession with dolphins and whales, especially because
yeah,
that's just a huge industry is to just go whale watching
yeah.
and be around these magnificent animals.
And to go back to the zoo thing where like they're learning, like say an elephant, for example, like the veterinarians are learning about this species so they can help elephants in the future. They're almost like a, so there's a lot of pros to the
Yeah.
zoo factor, right? So
Yeah, and there's nothing that for me it's like a double-edged sword. Like you see the behavior, you wish that those animals could be out in the wild instead of for us to look at, but at the same time, some of them absolutely could never go back
no,
because
they're
they were rescued.
institutionalized. Yeah,
Right. So it is a complicated issue and the vets are learning from them so that they can go out into the
yeah.
wild and help animals in those species survive. So it's not ever easy. I don't think science is ever easy in like choosing a side one way or the other. It's just more eye-opening as an adult than when you were a kid and you're just seeing something amazing for the first time.
Yeah, 100%. So that's why you're doing these. So is documentary film your in your future? Is that what you want to do?
Yeah, so currently, with my business, I am a contractor with the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration. So I go out with NOAA on their ships and we put out remote operated vehicles, which is just a really big robot in the middle of the ocean. And we do exploration and science. They collect different pieces of coral or sponges or anything that the site rocks in order to understand our world. And we man all of the film as well as photography that comes from that. So that's kind of what I'm doing currently. But I'm always looking and funding for that next bigger story as well. There are a few, especially ocean-based stories that I'm working on in a series that I'm working towards.
And you seem like you know your stuff, like in terms of like the technology of shooting. It's a really nicely great looking film. It's a beautiful film, and sometimes it's not, right? Where like you don't. I think one of the reasons why what I liked about your film so much is that you don't run away from the bad things, right?
Yeah.
Like you're seeing some horrific. You got some horrific images in the film, and it
Yeah.
brings people to reality. Where like, hey, look at these cute dolphins. We should save them. But no, it's not a, you know what I mean? It's not for like an 8-year-old to watch. It's pretty horrific.
Yeah, that's why we put the warning ahead of time,
Yeah.
is because it is. I mean, you're talking about third degree burns on dolphins, and that's not pretty. Even if it was a person, you wouldn't. I want people to feel it. And so I debated a lot about like how many images could we show? How graphic can we go? Because there's worse images out there. And we just tried to find a balance between like keeping the audience engaged and not making them run away because it's just too, or cringing or turning it off because it's just too emotionally taxing. But also keeping those images very present. And I do think, at least with documentary, we kind of use whatever we can, right? So there's archival, and the image quality to me never really matters in my brain because we're so used to seeing content all the time now that mixing different types of images, it has become a lot easier. For me, it's a lot more important for sound to come through, whether that's an interview or natural sound or whatever else. We as people can stand to watch images all day long, but if we can't really stand bad sound. So that is definitely was a focus on the film as well. And that's another reason why I went back to clean it.
Clean it up. And what did we send the audience to you? What did you think of what the audience had to say about your film from our festival?
Well, it was just surprising and wonderful. I obviously, the timing has always been something on my brain. Is it too short? Did I go too fast?
Yeah.
And so hearing somebody say like it was perfect, like perfect amount of time, don't need any more. And I was that really touched me. But also just seeing on their faces the absolute care. That has been the best experience for doing a festival run, is hearing from the audience just the amount of care and the motivation that they want to get involved. So it's doing what I intended and what I had hoped, and seeing your feedback showed that.
And so you're doing what you're doing now. So I guess you're almost like a kind of exploring another film. You're trying to find what's, because this takes a lot of time, right? So your next big project is going to take a couple years of your life, right? So you gotta.
Yeah. Yeah. We're really focusing. I kind of wanted to go a little happier in this one instead of living in something that was so sad. But we're looking to do a series on the Farallon Islands, which is an island chain 2 hours outside of San Francisco. They are they're known as a keystone space. So there are things in our ocean and in our world known as keystone species. An
Mhm.
otter is a really great example. If you take an otter out of a ecosystem, it completely collapses because it is key to keeping the whole ecosystem alive. So if you imagine a space, an island chain as that for the like hundreds of thousands of birds,
Mhm.
7 different types of seals and sea lions, and even great white sharks. That's really rare. And so we're trying to do a series about that because it's really unique that this space has life being happening on it every single season. There's not usually a space that animals are giving birth on during the winter time or during the fall. So it's very an amazing place. I've been there one time, but previously I'm one of like maybe probably now like 400, 500 people who've been on the island. So it's definitely close to my heart, and I think a story that needs to be told.
Yeah, you sold me there. I want to see that. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well,
Anything in the world that we don't, not many people have seen yet is
I
there's.
mean the ocean, honestly, like
I was good. Yeah, they we haven't even. I guess they say that humans haven't even explored, like, what, they only explored like 50% of it so far.
Yeah, like it, so what we do, our robots go down to 6,000 meters,
Yeah.
which is mainly for the most part, the base of the ocean. There are places that are deeper, but we have scratched the surface on the deep. You just don't know what's every single time we dive, it's the first time anybody has seen that.
Yeah.
And so it is quite rare. And there are a whole bunch of bug species that still have are being discovered, plants as
The
well. If you look
rainforest,
at,
right? They
yeah,
have,
in the
yeah.
rainforest in the Amazon, and technology is getting a lot better, so we're able to do like genes and actually figuring out where all of these species end up and can name them. But yeah, there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah.
When I say the Farallon Islands to people, have even in the United States, even
No.
in San Francisco, never heard of it.
Yeah.
So it's just finding those kind of stories, and just trying to show the world there's still so much we don't understand.
Yeah, and like forget about space, right? Like let's like not let's figure out this place that we're on right now. Not that I don't
Well,
I'm against going to space, but it just like you know what I mean? We haven't even like you said, we haven't even scratched the surface of what the Earth is, and we haven't even found all the species yet, right? So
right. Right. And I mean, there's because of climate change and where we are right now, we're learning new things. For example, another film that we are currently working on is talking about the slowing of the currents within our oceans. That
mm,
has been studied for over 10 years, that every single year the currents are slowing down. What does that mean for fisheries? What does that mean for the animals? You were talking about a crab being found somewhere completely different.
yeah,
Think of if that main pathway that animals use to get from one continent to another completely crashes, what
yeah.
happens? So that's kind of, we're discovering all these new things as time goes on, and I don't think there's ever going to be an end to storytelling in that sense.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk again when you make your next film. I'd love to see what you do next. I think this film is fantastic, and you're a really great conversationalist too. So I can see why you're probably a really good interviewer too. So I think
Thank you.
you're just speaking of scratching the surface. I think you're just scratching the surface as a filmmaker. So I think you got like plenty of films to go in your future.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I love storytelling, and I constantly am looking for stories, and I love the fact that what I do with science-based storytelling and getting involved with all of the scientists that I have, that it's completely different. Every story that I've told is it's not the same, and I get to learn things, which makes it fun. So I don't see me stopping anytime soon if they keep allowing me to make the stories. So,
On that note, let's talk when you make your next film.
all right. Thank you very
Thank you so
much.
much. You're awesome.
Have a good day.